Isaac Trotter from 24/7 Sports put out his way too early men's college basketball Big Ten power rankings. That's quite the title right there. And Kent, we looked at some of these a couple weeks ago, and like Rutgers and Maryland was in the top four. I think it was Indiana, Purdue, Rutgers, Maryland. UCLA was kind of near the middle, and we were like, what's the deal with that? And Michigan was kind of near the bottom. We were like, what's the deal with that? Well, Isaac here is a little bit different. He's got UCLA number one, Indiana, Purdue, Oregon number four, Michigan, Illinois, Rutgers, Maryland, Nebraska, Ohio State, Michigan State, Iowa, Wisconsin, Washington, USC, Penn State, Northwestern, and Minnesota. Kent, will you stand for this kind of Northwestern Chris Collins slander, Northwestern at 17th?
I absolutely will not. I will not stand for it. That's why I'm sitting right now. I will not stand up for this ranking. Yeah, I'm upset about that. I'm shocked too, because I do understand that Chicago's team did lose Chicago's player, Boo Buie, this year. I get that. And, he was the face of their team for so long, and it's a tough guy to replace. But what they have returning next year, and they still have, correct me if I'm wrong here, Chris Collins is still coaching that team. I just do not foresee them being in that bottom four of the Big Ten next year. I just can't see it. So I will not stand for that. That was probably, I know we kind of, on the notes here, we were going to say who was too high, but definitely Northwestern way too low in the rankings on this one, for sure.
Yeah, we can start wherever. As I was reading that, I was like, oh yeah, Kent not going to let this Chris Collins here pass. Larry, man, Rutgers at 7th. Do you feel like that's too high? Do you feel like that's about right? Too low? What are your thoughts here on Rutgers at 7?
I think so. First of all, I think the whole ranking is interesting, because if you read, what they're why they're putting teams where they're putting them, there's so much emphasis on the transfer portal guys they bring in. Understandable. You bring in a highly rated guy, it's going to catapult you to the top of the rankings. Your expectations are going to go up. Understood. However, there's something to be said, especially in basketball, for, style, culture, the way guys meld together and how long it takes them to hit the ground running. And, we can mention a guy like Collins, these coaches, these types of guys, they need that culture. They need guys coming back. You look at Indiana, great haul. And Ballo, a guy that, because he was on the West Coast for so long, I was tuning into late at night, like, who is this guy? And when his name entered the transfer portal, I would have loved for Rutgers to try to grab him. The fact Indiana has been going all out with all these resources, they are like a hot landing spot now. They look interesting. So with respect to your question with Rutgers, do I think Rutgers belongs where they are? As I'm scrolling through these rankings earlier, with all the hype with Rutgers, obviously they lured in the number 2 and number 3 freshmen in the incoming class. They also have some other highly touted freshmen, that weren't as highly ranked, but we think are going to be pretty good. I was waiting to see, where are they? They're going to be up there somewhere. I would have thought top 5 just with all that hype. But I'm going to tell you something. Without Cliff Amori, who left, and I expected him to leave, and without Rutgers having been able thus far to lure in any other formidable rim protector in the transfer portal, I'm a little bit hesitant to crown Rutgers as, a title contender or anything else, simply because I'll give you 2 reasons, and I don't want to digress all, crazy into Rutgers, but you go from a team who we knew who they were pre-crazy NIL transfer portal. You had these staples. You had Geo Baker. You had Ron Harper Jr., you had guys who came through a system, had a culture, had a brand, played defense. You knew what you were going to get. And last year was the first year where I think Steve Peichel, it looked to me like what he was doing was preparing for the arrival of these 2 highly touted freshmen who like to run the floor, who have this insane athletic offensive ability. And he starts opening things up, bringing in a bunch of kids in the transfer. We had a highly touted freshman who's now in Nebraska, in Gavin Griffiths. I think it was top 20 player at one point at least. He comes in, he's supposed to be this lights out shooter. Expectations are so high, and we're supposed to run the floor and have this newfound offensive firepower and athleticism. And what we find is when they try to get away from that brand, and I don't think Peichel was consciously trying to get away from defense, but when you set yourself up to have so much expectation in terms of running the floor on offense, and it doesn't click on a given night. It affects your defense, and that affects the brand and what Rutgers needs to win. Here's my thing. Ton of great guards, to the point that we're the deepest at guard maybe I've seen in Steve Pikiel's career. Maybe I've seen in my life at Rutgers, because you have solid guards coming in who were leaders on lower levels, lower level leagues, backing up, fourth, fifth guys off the bench in the backcourt. But the front court, we got Zach Martini from Princeton, who's a very good player. He can step out. He can make you stretch a little bit. He can shoot. But we don't have somebody to bang right now around the rim. And without that, looking at the rest of the Big Ten and what we're going to be up against, I got to say, it's a long-winded way to say I think they're where they should be, because I wouldn't put them low with the expectations, but I'm not going to crown them with two great freshmen, but freshmen and no anchor. That's where I am.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense. That was going to be a lot of what I was thinking as well, is like they have too much talent coming in, and Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. I try to say Ace Bailey first because he is the higher ranked player, but I guess it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, but you're totally right. That's my concern. Like I'm glad Jeremiah Williams is back, and I'm glad some of these other players are back too. But if they don't have that down low presence, especially in the Big Ten, we've seen teams who have good guard play in the Big Ten and don't have the post players to be able to be able to play down low with the other guys, just not do well in the Big Ten. They might do well out of the conference, but then they come in the conference and they just don't do nearly as well. So I think losing Cliff Amorie was a huge loss for Rutgers, and I wish it didn't happen. I really, really wish we would be seeing Ace Bailey with Dylan Harper this year, in addition to Cliff Amorie.
And I'll say this, though, and I want your guys' opinion. With the point you just made, JR, I think it's interesting. Big Ten play, which I personally really like because I like old school basketball and like a full team. I've noticed that when we get out into out of conference play, especially in the tournament, and that's why I loved seeing Purdue actually advance last year all the way to the title game with Edey being such a presence, is I've noticed that guard play and spacing and this ultra athleticism is a little bit of a different style of play than this bang down low style we've maintained a little bit in the Big Ten sometimes. And I think it hurts Rutgers in conference, which is obviously going to hurt their prospects going out. But it's going to be interesting to see how these teams, and I'm interested in your guys' opinion overall, Big Ten conference play as opposed to when we get out of the conference and the different styles that exist out there.
What do you think, Kent?
I think that, college basketball in general is just moving, or basketball even in general, is moving in that direction to where guard play is more emphasized than, getting a big that can just bang down there. And that might be why, I know for sure it's why for some teams, Purdue had so much success, is because, they zigged when everyone zagged. Everyone else was like trying to go guards, and they had a big guy that could go down low and basically dominate. So I don't think it's just the Big Ten. I think that, basketball in general is transitioning to, a more central focus on the guards than the big guys.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that it's a good change what's going on right now in college basketball. If you look and see the teams that were in the Final Four, 3 of the 4 of them had a dominant big man. And I think that is good for just the brand of the game right now. Now, I think it is a little bit more difficult because I do think that finding big men who are skilled enough to be the primary role player or the primary scorer in some cases on teams is rather difficult. If you look at Zach Edey, we're going to talk about the NBA draft here later, but Zach Edey scored better than the projected number 1 draft pick in his like agility rankings and stuff like that. Like, This is a dude who's 7'6", and he's out there. He's like 300 pounds, 7'6". He's out there moving better than the projected number 1 draft pick. Now, granted, he's not like a really small guy, but still, like that's amazing agility for him. And I think it really speaks to where college basketball in general is going. All right, I want to give some comments here, and then we'll check back in with if you guys think there's anybody that's too low, or if there's anybody else that you guys want to mention. So Jonathan says Rutgers is going to be fire next year. Philip, Maryland too high with Willard as coach. We're going to get to Willard later on. We have a discussion that I'm going to bring him up in. Kent, what about your Fighting Parker Foxes being last? Yeah, these rankings really hate you, don't they, Kent?
Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of some of the stuff that they put out on this one for sure.
Isaac Trotter. National, we'll be smaller, and I feel that the speed of the guards and small forwards will take us to another level. Definitely possible. Purdue returns early tournament exit next year. Philip says, ooh, that would be interesting. Clyde is finding the Indiana ranking humorous, and a few more things here about Purdue and stuff like that. All right. Kent, your thoughts on if there is anybody that is too high in these rankings?
Well, I'll start with, I'll just kind of go in order, actually. I'll start with Oregon. I think is a bit too high. I think that, I don't know a ton about Oregon. I'll be the first to say that. And I feel like anyone that does any of these rankings should be putting that out at the top of their article. Like, I really don't know about all of these teams, because if anyone says they know about every single player, that every transfer that's coming in, that would be really impressive. I'm sure there is a few guys that do that, but I'm not sure if Isaac Trotter knows about everybody that's coming into Oregon. I don't know if that was just a pick that he said, like, it's a cute pick, let's put Oregon up there. But with them entering the new conference, with all the travel that they have to do, and I'm looking up and down their roster, and they do have some good pieces, I just don't foresee them being in the top 5 at the end of the year. I think I have them projected more of like 8 or lower, so I don't think it's like super far off. I don't think they're going to be at the bottom, but I don't think that they're going to be top 5. Nebraska, I've talked about them the last 2 weeks. I think that they're going to be near the bottom of the Big Ten next year, so I'm surprised to see. I'm not surprised, with the good year that they had last year. I shouldn't say I'm surprised to see them at 9, but from what I see next year, I could see a really big drop-off for Nebraska. I know they added some pieces, but they lost a ton. They lost Tominaga, and now Rank Mass is going to be out with the injury. That's a ton of production for them that I'm just kind of worried about them being able to compete even in the top 10 of the Big Ten next year. So I could see them missing the Big Ten tournament next year, which is the bottom 4 teams, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, you're correct.
Yeah, so I don't know if they're going to make the Big Ten tournament next year. That's how I feel about Nebraska. I'm really low on them next year. And then I know you said we're going to talk about Willard later, but Maryland, I've seen multiple people's rankings for the way too early next year stuff. Everybody has them higher than what I have them. I don't see them in the top 10. I'm just not seeing what everybody else is seeing yet. I don't believe in Julian Reese as much. I don't think that they brought in any pieces, and they're losing Jameer Young. Obviously, like, there's just I just don't see it with Maryland. I'm not sold on them, and I know they're not ranked super high. 8 is like, right there in the middle, but I don't even see them getting that high next year. So those are the 3 teams that I have that are a little bit too high. And then I have some that are too low too, but we can come back to that if you'd like.
Go ahead, do your too low.
All right, I'll go quick on this one then. Illinois is too low at 6. I think that they're going to be top 4 next year. I will say for Mr. Trotter here, I do have the same top 3 that he has. I have it in a different order. I think it's more like Purdue and Indiana are a toss-up. I could go either way on which one's first or second.
I feel like you go coaching
UCLA
there, don't
is
you?
3rd. But then I see Illinois finishing at 4th next year. So I would move them up a couple of spots and put them in the top 5. Ohio State at 10. I see them more at like somewhere between 5 and 8. And then obviously I already talked about Northwestern at 17 is just blasphemy. It's insane. And then I think Philip is starting to get to know me a little bit too well, because he already asked about, I think he said something about Northwestern, but he also asked about Minnesota. Honorable mention, number 18. This is crazy that someone would think that they're going to be last place next year. I don't see it. They got Frank, whose last name is escaping me right now. Is Dawson Garcia coming back, right?
Dawson Garcia? Yeah, he's coming back.
Coming back. They still have Mike Mitchell. I understand they lost I'm messing up on everyone's name. Lost their point guard, but they did get a point guard from Oregon.
Hawkins,
so
yeah.
I just feel like Hawkins. I feel like they've taken a few steps this year to be back competitive again, and they're still going to have some of those guys next year. I don't want to say anything crazy. I'm not going to say they're going to be top 10, but 18 is way too low for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm thinking of an 18 type squad or something like that, I'm picking somebody like a Washington or a Penn State or something like that. And that's no disrespect to those teams. It's just they have new coaches and they didn't go out and get any slam dunks in the transfer portal, and they don't have any slam dunks in recruiting. I think you're right with Minnesota. You have a Dawson Garcia that's just far too skilled to allow his team to be dead last. And I get the whole idea that people have about like Ben Johnson. Is he really that good of a coach? And I think he's improving. I think he's getting better. I don't think that he's, the worst coach in the Big Ten, but who knows? Maybe we'll see that at the end of the year. Larry, your teams that are possibly too high, too low for you, any different thoughts than Kent or anything you want to reiterate?
Well, I think Illinois has got a really good, potential to be high up there in the top 4 or 5. I also think with all the new players coming in, and look, Underwood's a good coach. He's gotten a lot of the guys many times in the past. He's good at building rosters. But I think when you get to places like Illinois and you're going up against, teams like Rutgers when they're side by side in these rankings, and you have even Nebraska, where we mentioned, look, are they too high? There's a lot of questions in the middle of this ranking all the way down to the bottom, I think, because the league is so competitive. And with such a changing cast on every roster, it's so hard to see what their identities are and how they match up in the league. So I think overall, I mean, I know it's a conversation piece and it's the way too early rankings, but that's an understatement. I mean, there's a lot that we don't know. We haven't seen these teams in the out-of-conference schedules. I'm curious about the new coaches that we see. I think, a team like Ohio State, while they may not have, all of the talent, imports that so many other people do that are highly touted. You have a new coach who was the associate head coach, if I'm not mistaken. So there might be a little more continuity and culture there. And it wasn't like they were bottom of the barrel the last several years. I had a rough go of it recently. But, teams like that, and I think sometimes there's a tendency to look at the glitz coming in, the glamour coming in, and we can lose sight of proven coaches and programs that can weather storms and be formidable. And I'm not looking at an Iowa or a Michigan State and saying, wow, look at all the talent they've retained or they have coming in. But it's tough to count out programs, and coaches like that out and put them so far down. But again, there's so much variability in the middle there. I'm just kind of curious to see how it all shakes out. I like the top of the list. I think you can rearrange it as much as you want, but those teams, based on what they have, I think Indiana, I know there was a comment in there laughing at them. I mean, I'd say watch out for them. And their head coach is respected, not to mention the pieces they brought in. I think the top makes a lot of sense, and there's a lot of variability once you get past, 3.
Yeah, your thoughts on Ohio State are warranted. I don't know what to do with Ohio State this season. As an Ohio State fan, I want to believe in them. They did beat 2 Final Four teams this last year. They were the only team in the nation to beat 2 of the teams that were in the Final Four. Check me, make sure I'm right. I think I looked that up, right? But to my knowledge, they were the only team to beat 2 of the Final Four teams this past year. Now, granted, Jake Deaver only did that one time. Chris Holtmann did it the other time, and Chris Holtmann got fired. So, maybe it was
Who
a
was
fluke,
the other team you guys beat besides Purdue?
Alabama.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Not UConn. Nobody beat UConn. Well, I mean, people did beat UConn.
Somebody did.
Yeah. In the tournament, nobody did. Anyway, so I don't know what to do with Ohio State. I want to believe in them, but at the same time, like, I'm kind of just jaded at this point because I believed in them last year, and look what it got me. I got my head coach fired. So I don't know what to do with them this year. But I do want to ask you guys about one more before we move on, because I'll admit I was kind of shocked to see them this low, and I don't know if maybe it's just me or if you guys feel the same way, but Michigan State. I mean, Tom Izzo,
that's what I'm
number
saying.
11.
Like,
we really think he's going to miss the tournament. We really think they're going to let him miss the tournament. I mean, arguably he should have missed it last year. Now, granted, he won a game, so maybe put the doubters to rest there. But I mean, Michigan State 11th. I don't know.
It's weird it's just weird to see them that low, because usually they get the benefit of the doubt from everybody, so they're automatically put near like the top 5, and that just doesn't mean that they are top 5, though, just because people are giving them the benefit of the doubt. I think that they're accurately ranked in this. There's only a few teams that I thought were like appropriately in the right spot, and they were one of them. I just don't. Yeah. Last year, like I changed my mind a lot about them last year just based on how the season went, and with not a lot of things changing next year, and probably even getting worse at a few positions, I just don't. I could see them right at 11 next year and missing the tournament for sure.
I could see it happen. I'm just not predicting it to happen.
And
like I could see, yeah.
You have some freshmen coming in there. Freshmen haven't been great in recent years, as the article kind of says. But you got Akins, you got these guys that didn't really perform, and you got to trust Izzo, I think, to get the most out of them, the next year.
Why though? After this year, why do you have to do that after this year?
Because of his long history, man. I just think it's tough to I mean, we can say, in recent memory too, and we've beat Michigan State, the last few years. He hasn't been some powerhouse that we're terrified of, but I just got to think some of these guys is going to get up to speed. And
I thought that was going to happen all year because they went in preseason like top 5 or near number 1 last year, like preseason. And that wasn't just like some random guy on Twitter doing power rankings either. That was like actually their like ranking to start the year. And then they're borderline not making the tournament, winning 1 game in the Big Ten tournament against Minnesota. That was a close game, by the way. And I just don't know, man. I'm concerned about them.
And maybe they were operating on that same reputation I'm citing now and JR citing now to move them up last year when they went in, so highly touted. And every year it's supposed to be so great. Maybe the polish is wearing off and maybe it's fading a little bit over there. We will see.
We will see. We will see indeed. A lot of comments to get to in the comment section. Thank you everybody for your comments. Unfortunately, I can't get to all of them, but definitely some homers, also some good discussion there in the comments. I appreciate all of you. So let's